everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Hey everybody!
Welcome back to the King and the Bean. I'm your host, Ian. This
Hi,
is
host Ian.
Ryan, and this is Josh.
Hi.
Oh, you guys are all vertical for me because of how my screen is oriented. So Ian's
Mhm.
above me and Josh is on top.
Well,
Hey,
we're
how's it going down
recording
there?
my screen.
Yeah, there we go. You guys remember Hollywood Squares?
No,
I do.
Josh, did you ever watch Hollywood Squares?
no, I have no clue what that is. Is
It's
that the
like a
one
game.
where they're all stuck in like queues and whatever, and then who is it?
Whoopi Goldberg
Whoopi
Whoop! It's
Goldberg.
always Whoopi Goldberg. Yeah,
Always
in the
Whoopi
middle.
Goldberg. Yeah. Yeah.
says something sassy, like I don't know, whatever the fuck she says.
Yeah.
It's a lot of parodies,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. That's pretty much it. Yeah, it was like a game show or whatever.
Yeah, so that's our topic this week. Hollywood Squares.
Hollywood Squares. Should there be a remake?
They
Yes
did
or
nope.
no?
that.
Did they?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did.
Oh. Should there be another one? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, the real topic today is we're going back towards the serious and the political, and we're going to be talking about Project 2025 and Agenda 47. I I know.
I
So
wanted a sound effect, but I was like, I don't know if any of these work for this.
Cricket.
and then
I don't know.
maybe I feel like the logical train there is to not do any then.
You would think, right?
I
No.
would think. I did think, but I was wrong.
I'm
Um,
I. Why is Why is the air horn not appropriate? Explain to me what these things are, because I have no clue what they
okay,
are.
well, that was what I was gonna ask is, have you guys heard or do you know what Project 2025 or Agenda 47 is?
Nope, I have no clue what these things are.
Yes, I
Have
have
you,
heard of it.
Josh, have you heard these terms or not? They're
Not really, no.
completely
Yeah.
foreign to you. Okay. So, we'll start with a kind of brief summary of what they are, and then we're gonna get into it. Um, so just to preface it, is there is gonna be a lot of information that is gonna be said today. Feel free to stop me at any point in time if you want to talk about a specific topic or a specific note. And we'll see what we can get through. This also just a disclaimer. This will be an extremely truncated version of this. So we're not going to talk about everything about this topic, but we're gonna try and hit the highlights at the very least.
Mm,
So
Or the
Project
low
2020.
lights.
go
Yeah, it
on.
depends on.
Stop.
Gosh.
Go on. I want to learn here. Go
That was pretty
ahead.
good. That was pretty good. That was pretty
Thank you,
good.
thank you.
All right.
Somebody appreciated.
Go
Okay.
on, Ryan.
So, Project 2025 is a 920-page manifesto that was published by an institute called the Heritage Foundation, which is an activist conservative think tank that has been around since the 80s to promote conservative values and essentially restructure the entire government. And what it is basically a full detailed plan of if Trump wins re-election in 2024 this year. This is the full comprehensive plan of what they want to do in the first 180 days of the new Trump presidency.
And this is a 900-page thing.
920-page document.
Is this supposed to be expected for the people to read into, or
I think
other?
they're hoping that we don't read it.
I mean,
Yes,
it's 900 pages. Like that's a
right.
lot to go through.
It
It is
really
a lot to
is.
go through. Yes, and even like so doing my research for this, obviously I did not read 920 pages of this. There are a lot of websites out there that have like summarized the main talking points of this as well. Wikipedia was a good source for it too. I know people crap on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is actually really good if you know how to use it because
Mhm.
they have citations. So there are citations on almost every piece of information that take you to the bottom of the page, hyperlinks to the source information. And it has it all. I use Wikipedia a lot for this because it has it all kind of in different categories and has it really nicely summarized. But yes, so information is readily available. To go back to your question, Josh, because people have dissected it because it is a lot. But to Ian's point, I think that they were expecting that people don't read it because it is so robust and they probably don't want most people to know what they're going to be talking about. And so we thought it would be a good idea to go through the highlights of this and talk about it so that people do know because there's some pretty interesting policies that they want to push through. And so again, this document was not created by Trump himself. This was created by the Heritage Foundation, which is a group of conservative activists that are trying to push a conservative agenda through the United States. However, the Heritage Foundation is closely linked to Trump, with the president, a guy named Kevin Roberts, saying that the organization's current role is to institute Trumpism. So they're very intrinsically linked with Trump even endorsing the foundation at one of the foundation dinners in 2022. So the reason why I mention that is because Agenda 47 is a different document that Trump himself put out um, because once Project 2025 became more public, there was reasonably a lot of backlash towards it. So, what Trump essentially tried to do is say, "Oh, that's not mine. I don't have anything to do with that. I don't know what that's all about. That's crazy. You
Mhm.
guys are crazy. This is my plan." And so he put out what is called Agenda 47, which is essentially the same thing. It's just a different name, but it has the same policies, it has the same talking points, it's just a different name to try and, get away from the backlash towards, Project 2025.
And as much as he tries to distance himself from Project 2025, a lot of the key people who worked on it and wrote it were parts of his administration before and have been really close to Trump in the past. So like
Mhm,
he's
mhm.
been trying to tell people, "Oh, it's not mine. I don't know anything about it." But he has endorsed these people. He has worked very closely with these people. So it's very unlikely that he really doesn't know anything about it and really isn't affiliated with it, but he's trying to tell
Right,
everybody that he's not because it is very unpopular.
right.
Mhm.
And for good reason. So, before we get into the details, there's to go along with kind of people's impression of it, a lot of legal experts have stated that it undermines the rule of law, separation of powers among the government entities, separation of church and state, and civil liberties, which, as we discussed, are all crucial aspects of the American government system. And there is an educator named Ruth Ben Ghiat. I don't know if that's how I'm saying her name right, but she's quoted and she's a scholar of fascism and authoritarian leaders. Works at the New York University and different universities. I believe I saw that she was at the University of Hawaii as well. She said that Project 2025 is a plan for an authoritarian takeover of the United States that goes by a deceptively neutral name, which I think is an important note, right? The name itself is pretty bland, right? Just Project 2025. What do we want to do in Project 2025 or in 2025? And I'm sure that's done intentional. She says the plan's intent to abolish federal departments, which we're going to talk about, and agencies, is to destroy the legal and governance cultures of liberal democracy and create new bureaucratic structures staffed by new politically vetted cadres or groups of supporters to support autocratic rule. Because essentially, and we're going to talk about this, one of the main points of Project 2025 and Agenda 47 is to establish Trump as a dictator
Yeah.
and a full Trumpist government. Um, so that's hugely why it's dangerous, and pretty much what that supports is white Christian nationalism, essentially, and white supremacy. And we're going to go through a lot of the, or at least some of the talking points to reiterate all of this, but it's a very dangerous policy for a lot of people in this country. Um,
And that reminds me
so,
of I saw an interview that Biden did
mhm,
within the last week or whatever, and I love that ever since he kind of dropped out of the race, he like doesn't care what anybody thinks anymore, and he's just saying all the like not the craziest stuff, but it's crazy because you think he used to be so like kind of professional and like he didn't want to rock the boat or anything, but he was
mhm,
saying like on January 6th like or he was talking about like the KKK and how usually they wear hoods because they don't want to be identified in public and like they
mhm,
want to hide in the shadows and stuff.
mhm,
But he's like on January 6th they took off their hoods because they saw that they had an ally in the White House and
mhm,
that they saw that somebody could protect them from the White House so they didn't have to hide anymore and they could be like out in the open. And I'm like,
yeah,
and it was just cool because it's like finally somebody said it, and also,
yeah,
that's our president that's like acknowledging it and being like, yeah,
mhm,
like that's what happened. And basically, Project 2025 is giving those people, you know, uh, dictatorship.
yeah. It just and it's funny to me too, and I made a point of this, is it's just so funny that, like, the Conservative Party is typically the party of, like, small government and small government oversight,
It's
and yet this entire plan is literally restructuring the government to give themselves absolute control.
Well, and that's been the biggest criticism of the party as of late is that they're always about like less government oversight and all that stuff, states' rights, blah blah blah. But they're the ones who like want to ban LGBT protection. They want to check people's genitals as they say and do all this stuff, which that's all more government overreach. And like
Mhm.
yeah, they want to get rid of like government agencies and all this stuff, but they just want to replace it with other stuff just to fit their like religious views or whatever. So it's
And
not
that's a
it's
lot
not
of what
less
they're doing.
government oversight. It's the same. It's just in different areas, and what they
Mhm,
see is more important. But it's
mhm.
not less.
Yeah.
But it's just they give themselves fake names all the time. Like they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth.
Yeah,
And
we're gonna yeah, we'll talk about that too, because there's stuff on that here,
yeah,
but
but
yeah.
go ahead.
Josh, do you have any questions so far? Do you
No,
understand what it is?
as far as I'm aware of, it's just a bad thing going into dictatorship, which is against what you know what the founding fathers were all about.
It's pretty much contrary to everything that the American government has been since its inception. The
Hmm.
reason why people immigrated to America from the UK specifically is because they didn't want a monarchy. They didn't want a
Hmm.
dictator, essentially. And they came over here and created a government that was very anti dictator and very separation of church and state because they didn't like that religion was a huge part of the monarchy. And they came over here and created a government that was like, nope, we're not going to have one person in charge. We're not going to have religion be a part of the government. And what is this party that is loves to claim we're strict constitutionalists and we care about what the founding fathers said and they were the best and they knew everything? Doing what are they doing? They're doing everything exactly contrary to that and going back to
Hmm.
the entire point of why the pilgrims came here in the first place.
Yeah. So
So
fun time.
that's it's a party of hypocrisy is really what it is. But also, I think a point is, and I put this at the end, but I kind of want to say it now, just because we were talking about it, is this is not the viewpoint of all conservatives or even of all Republicans. And there have been a lot who have voiced opposition to this plan and to this kind of authoritarian rule. There are a lot of people who on both sides who don't support this. And I saw a video on TikTok the other day that I wanted to mention. They're at one of the Trump or not Trump Harris Walls rallies in Arizona. One of the mayors, the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, who's a Republican, his name is
Hmm.
John Giles. He went on stage and gave a speech at the rally, basically saying that he is a longtime Republican and he's always been a Republican his whole life. But he says, I do not recognize my party It has been taken over by extremists, and I have something to say to those of us in the political middle. You don't owe a damn thing to that political party. In particular, you do not owe anything to a party that is out of touch and hell bent on taking our country backwards. You owe no loyalty to the candidate that is morally and ethically bankrupt. And I think that that's really important
I
that
mean, props
people
to
who,
that guy.
yeah, it was awesome. And like everyone, for sure. And everyone at the rally was like cheering for him. And like it was awesome.
I mean, I think that's very important. I think, I feel like it's 8 years too late in a well, I mean, it's not too late. I wish it had come 8 years ago when,
Hmm.
it all started because maybe we could have nipped it in the bud. But I mean, it's better in this case. It's not too late.
Hmm.
I think if he got elected and then people tried to say it is a little too late because he could start implementing policy that we can't come back from. Because as
Yeah.
people said, they thought, the last time when they voted Hitler in, for example, they didn't get to another election for like 16 years or something. Like they
And that
didn't
is
get
part of
another
Trump's
chance.
plan, as he
And
has said everyone, and we've mentioned this before, like you vote one more time and you don't have to vote again. Like
yeah,
if he gets in, he's not leaving.
so I think it's very important that, a lot of the Republican Party and I don't think they're all bad, but it's all these extremist people who want this authoritarian government and it's like as I've said before, I don't even necessarily think all their policy ideas are probably bad, but there's just a lot of fundamental ideas in that party that, I can't agree with. And also all the extremism and we rule by religion and taking away people's rights. That's not okay. That I think
Yeah.
they definitely need to, vote for democracy and then like get a hold of their party, create a third party, like
Hmm.
kind of break off and create the new conservatives, not the GOP, because first of all that stands for Grand Old Party, and they're not grand, they're just old party, and kind of rebuild because it definitely has been taken over by the extremists and the
Yeah.
Trumpists, and
Yeah.
it's not what it was even 10 years ago. Like,
Hmm.
when Obama was running and we saw like Mitt Romney or even John McCain, it was such a different like political climate compared to, ever since Trump entered the
And I
atmosphere.
believe both of those individuals are even not on Trump's side. Like I'm pretty sure they're pretty anti-Trump vocalists as
John
well.
McCain was the whole time until he passed, rest in peace. And I mean, Mitt
Hmm.
Romney's been an active, spoken out against him. I think he's kind of been wishy-washy because I think he's trying to play like a middle ground,
Hmm.
which don't 100% respect, but I understand that he probably is trying to maybe work from within,
Yeah.
and maybe see what
Maybe.
he can do because he was their nominee at one point. He has to have some um, power within that party. Like they respected him enough to be like, oh yeah, we're gonna put you against Obama.
Right.
Um, you would think so.
Yeah. But I just wanted to make that point that like when we talk about Republicans and we talk about conservatives, we're mostly talking about the extremists that are in the government that are trying to completely radically change the government in a very negative way. We're not talking about every person who identifies as conservative or Republican.
We're
And we
talking about the
understand that,
maggots.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. And that there is a separation there. Because I want to make that clear that like if you have a different ideology, that's fine. But like they're the MAGA idiots, the maggot. What do
Maggots.
you say? Maggots, the
Maggots.
maggots. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's who we're talking about when we say that stuff. Um, just to separate that, because I don't want people to be like, "Oh, you hate all conservatives." Like, no, just if this is your ideology, it's we strongly are against it,
Yeah, and I
and
think
for
now
good
is
reason.
really the time for them to stand up for, what this
Hmm.
country was founded on.
Yeah.
And, you'll have, hopefully in 4 years, you guys can vote for somebody who stands up for the Republican Party and what they actually represent and not whatever Trump represents.
Hmm.
And maybe, that party can rebuild itself. And I think
Yeah.
it's needed to since the 2016 election. Um, and I mean, it has for a while. They haven't won the presidential popular vote in over 30 years.
Hmm.
So, but instead of changing, they're regressing and they're just trying to play weird games and, you know, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now let's get into the nitty gritty. Um, and again, we're going to be talking about. There's a lot of things that are going to be said, and if you want to elaborate on anything, you have comments, or you have questions, feel free to pop in. But we're going to try to get through as much as we could get through because, again, it's a 920-page document and it's incredibly dense. So there's a lot going on. So the first thing we're going to talk about is government reformation. So what do they want to do to the government, or what does this plan state they're going to do to the government should Trump win? So the first point we're going to talk about is what they're going to do is they're going to reclassify tens of thousands of federal civil service jobs um, and make them political appointees. Now, what this means is these would not be regular government jobs where you put in a job application and then you do an interview, you get hired or you don't get hired. What these will be is they're political appointees, which means the president, Trump, gets to assign people to these positions. Um, Essentially, with the purpose of flooding the government with strict loyalists and essentially creating a Trump army in the government. And how that will be done is there is essentially like a test or like a interview of ideology, and you would, in order to work for the government in these jobs, which would be a pretty robust amount of them, you essentially have to align politically with what they agree with. You have to take a test in order to get in, and there is also like a crazy number of these training videos to help indoctrinate these people into operating the way they want them to operate. Right? So why might this be bad, guys?
It's all one power, one person saying everything and be like, yeah, yeah, totally, totally. That's
Mhm.
good. We won't disagree with you.
On government, most government jobs are supposed to be apolitical, so they're not really supposed to be like if you work at the post office, it shouldn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. You're just supposed to make sure the mail goes where needs to go, or assign passports to whoever filled out their application. But like if they're like a Trump loyalist or whatever, they could say, "Oh, we're only gonna give passports to white people." Oh,
Mhm.
or "Oh, you're trying to give us your ballot for this election. Well, we see that your last name's not a white last name, so we're gonna put it in this box that doesn't get sent in."
Right.
So they could definitely do something like that because, and he's already tried to get votes thrown out. He's already tried to make votes suddenly reappear. So I mean,
Mhm.
I definitely feel like that's something he could happen, and that's just something with the post office, which he already tried to interfere with in 2020, and
Mhm.
thankfully it didn't work when he tried. I forget exactly what he did, but he made it hard for like all these mail-in ballots to happen in the middle of a pandemic when we couldn't vote in person. So,
Right.
um,
Yeah, exactly. So basically, just turning the government again into a Trumpist government as opposed to it being a federal government by changing it so he gets to assign people into jobs,
yeah,
which is very dangerous.
and I mean, because we already saw him do that before, where what is her name? The lady. I'm trying not to use mean words. The lady who was in charge of education while he was president.
Betsy DeVos.
You remember her name? I was gonna
Yeah,
call her
because it
Nancy.
was horrible. Well, close enough.
Nancy DeVos is what I came up with in my head. But so
Close.
that yeah, close. But like she was very so the head of Secretary of Education. You're supposed to be like in charge of basically all public schools in America, kind of.
Hmm.
Um, she is very much against public schooling and for private schooling, but he's like, that's who I want to be in charge. And she was kind of starting to kind of get rid of or like dismantle public education and give like vouchers for, oh, I don't want my kid to go to public school, I want them to go to private school, so I can take that money away from public schools and put it to private schools. Well, I mean, you shouldn't be able to take public funds and go to private school because then public money is going to like religious education, and public money's not supposed to go towards anything religious. So I mean, there
Yeah.
was so many problems with.
So we're
And
skipping ahead a bit, but that is exactly part of the plan as well. Is one the straight up abolishment of the Department of Education as a whole,
sorry.
as well as no, that's fine, as well as instituting school vouchers so parents could send their
Did that not
students to
did they
whatever
not
school.
succeed in getting that the school voucher program before, or was that just
I
like
don't believe
something they were
so.
working on?
I think it's something they were working
Okay,
on.
because I
That
remember
wasn't.
hearing about that before.
Yeah, but that is something that they're gonna do too. But yes. So yeah, abolishment of the Department of Education, which means that there will be no more federal say in education, because what they want to do is they want to leave it up to states in a sense, but also they want to increase parent say in education, which we'll get to. But just to talk about some things that would be essentially abolished along with the Department of Education, because we think about that like, well, what does that mean if the Department of Education is no more? Basically, programs under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act would be moved to the Department of Health and Human Services, and the National Center for Education Statistics would be moved to the Census Bureau, which is one just inflating the responsibilities of other bureaucratic or the other government agencies, um, which the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act facilitates most of the equity practices for students with disabilities in education. Um, some of this that is covered in that is providing special education classes just in general. So if there's no more Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, then there are no more special education classes for students, which, as we all know, is very problematic for um, equity in education. There will be no more IEPs, which are individualized education plans for students. Um, and I know you guys aren't in education, but if you are in education, you know how important IEPs are for certain students. Basically, they're plans provided for students that are based on, like a meeting among teachers, uh, psychologists, counselors are at those meetings as well, to basically determine like if a student has some kind of learning disability, or any kind of like disability that impacts their learning. So it could be ADHD, it could be like an actual learning disability, it could be anything like that. There are plans that are put, like, whether it's a physical or mental disability of any kind, there is accommodations that can be made for students to help them be more successful in school. All of this is done under the Department of Education, and so if there's no more department, IEPs would be a thing of the past as well, or at the very least less kind of enforced, because currently IEPs and 504 plans are legal documents that need to be adhered to. So if there's no oversight for that, then services go out the window essentially, which is bad for a lot of students.
I need
Um,
to apologize really quick. You were talking about like ADHD and individualized learning plans, and I got distracted because this thing keeps showing like my bookcase and stuff. And I was trying to
uh,
see if I could like change a setting or something or get that to go away. And I was messing with it, and then I was like, oh shoot, my screen's the one being recorded while Ryan's talking.
oh, that's funny.
So I am sorry if that
That's fine.
happens while you're in the middle of, telling us important stuff.
That's fine. Like I said, there's gonna be a lot of me rambling on today, and it's
But
gonna be
I
a lot.
totally was just focusing on like this and trying to rid of it because it's annoying me.
Mhm.
But yeah, my
That's
bad.
fine.
But
All right.
ironic that you talked about specialized learning plans and
While
ADHD.
you're being distracted while
Yes.
learning.
Yes.
And there's more. I'm not gonna go through everything just because like it's a lot, but it would, getting rid of the Department of Education obviously heavily impacts education. Um, so again, I don't want to spend too much time getting into nitty gritty because there's a lot to get through, and we've already been going for a while.
I do want to
Um,
say I think it's funny that people say like, "Oh, well the whole country shouldn't like decide what everybody gets to learn anyway." But it's like we have such a vast difference in state education as it is. Like, I really don't think it needs to get worse. Like the
yeah.
standard of education, like let's say California versus like South Carolina, it's already so different. I mean,
Hmm.
even just like the education that we had where we were in California versus like what Josh had was very different. So
Yeah.
I think, it should be more standardized in my opinion instead of you know, different because, when they talk about, US education, they put us all together. They don't say, California education's great, but blah 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 blah. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know. And I definitely feel that, talking to people from different states and stuff like that, or like, meeting, working companies where people come from out of state and stuff, like, just talking about stuff. They're like, oh, we didn't have that, but we had like, square dancing class or whatever, and I'm like, why? Like,
Yeah.
how is that important to you or whatever? But
Yeah. Well, the
um,
point is, and I have a whole section on education a little bit later, but like the point is essentially like they just want taught what they want taught, right? And so what that means is like not teaching slavery, not teaching um
None of the
evolution,
bad
not teach
stuff.
yeah, exactly, none of the bad stuff. That's exactly what it is. Putting religion back in schools,
but
right?
if you
Putting
want
Bible
that, that's
study,
the
putting that
purpose of private school. That is not what public
but they
education
want
is
that to
for.
be for everybody because they only want people to know across the country. They only want people to know what they want them to know. And that's the whole point. Um, so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but I'm just gonna like run through real quickly some more government focus stuff. So essentially, what they will also want to do is turn the FBI into a politically motivated entity that acts on the whims of the president. Um, Currently, the FBI is a non-political third-party entity that is focused on federal investigation. It is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But what Trump wants to do is basically use them as his personal attack dogs to do what he wants with them. They are also, and this is an important point that seems benign, they are also want to dismantle the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, or NOAA, which houses the National Weather Service. So anytime any of you out there open up your phone and look at the weather app, that information is provided to you by the National Weather Service. Tells you what the temperature's outside today and for the week. There's weather forecast, tells you what the humidity is.
Tornado
More
warnings.
more importantly, warnings for tornadoes, hurricanes, other national disaster or natural disasters that may be going on. Without the National Weather Service and NOAA as a whole, that information will not be publicly available. If you want that information, it will be provided by private companies for a fee, essentially. So what they want to do is privatize and monetize weather information. Now, depending on who you are, that may not seem like the biggest deal, but again, if you live in Tornado Alley, if you live on the East Coast, if you live on the West Coast, we almost had a tornado or a hurricane last year, right? If you live in areas that can are known to have natural disasters and you appreciate having a warning system to let you know one that they're coming, two what the status is, and three track them through their progress, um, you would have to pay for that information as opposed to it being provided for you for free from our government. So their essential policy is, unless you want to pay for it, good luck, have fun with that. And that's
And what
ridiculous.
would be the reason behind trying to monetize it? Just to get more money to the
Yeah,
government?
Money, money.
privatize it.
That's the reason.
I'm sure Trump would make a business immediately so that he could profit off of it.
Hmm. Which is insane, right? They're taking this service that is for free. Anyone with a phone or a computer can just type in what is the weather today in Los Angeles or in Kentucky or in wherever you live, and you just get that information. If there's a tornado forming, you get that information. You know, okay, there's a tornado warning. Okay, here's kind of what's been going on. Flood warnings. We got that a lot this past year with the amount of rain we had in California. We got a lot of flood warnings. None of that would be available unless you pay a private company for that information.
This organization was founded on February 9th, 1870. So it's
Mm.
been there for 150 years, and they just want to get rid
Hmm.
of it so that
So
people will
that
have
they
to
could
pay for that
privatize it.
information.
Yep. Also, there's a lot of, and I don't detail all of the specifics of this because it kind of permeates a lot of the policies, but there's a very strong anti-China mentality in throughout this. Basically, they think that China is America's biggest enemy right now, and so anything Chinese or from China is bad. Some things that includes is instituting a ban on TikTok because it's a tool for espionage. So if they Trump getting say bye to TikTok, the Confucius Institute, which is like a school of I don't know exactly. I didn't look too much into it because I didn't have as much time. But basically, like a school for teaching like Chinese history and like integrating into the United States and stuff like that, because it's a tool for corruption for American higher education, according to people who wrote this document, as well as pretty much anything China related, like any kind of regarding economics, like any kind of trade will be heavily mitigated with China. Goods from China, if they even are coming to the US, will be heavily tariffed along with other tariffs they want to put on. So pretty much just like a very strong anti-China mentality in this administration.
So
And then
weird.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you see Trump talk about the tariffs, he explains the tariffs as like reverse taxes type of thing, where like China would have to pay more to send stuff to us. But I see so many things from Mark Cuban, and he's like, and who pays for the tariffs in the end? Like, if you're somebody who's importing somebody, who's paying for that increased price of goods? Is it you? Like somebody explained that, and nobody was answering the question. Basically, he's just saying like all they're gonna do is raise the prices on their stuff. Like
yep,
you import something from China, you're not eating that cost. You're making it cost more for your consumer, who's then gonna
right.
pay for it for you. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, the tax isn't gonna go up, but the tariff. To get that good is going to cost more, and then that's going to go on to the consumer. So it's
Yeah,
definitely going to impact middle and lower class families a whole lot more, and make
yeah,
everything more expensive for all of us. Even though that's why he's trying to paint it as like it's the opposite.
right,
Like it's gonna harm China, not us,
right.
and try to get those places to move their manufacturing here so they don't have to import. But like
Hmm.
as Mark Cuban was saying, is like that takes so many years and it's so expensive to move manufacturing here, that like that would skyrocket prices like immediately.
Yeah. Josh, you know what a tariff is?
It's like a tax on imports or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. So any product that is purchased and imported to the United States would have a like just like a flat tax added to it, or maybe not flat. It could be fluctuating. I don't know. Probably depends on the country. I would venture to guess that depending on what country those products are coming
Yeah.
from, there would be an increased tax on them. Um, but any product would be hit with a tariff of some sort, which, as Ian was saying, would just go straight to the consumer and just mean that everything, any international product, would be just much higher in cost. So, that's a good tangent into our talk on economics. So we already talked about the tariff, which is a big point of it as well. They want to abolish the Federal Reserve, which is the basically the federal bank system. Um,
What would be the impacts of abolishing the Federal Reserve?
let's look that up real quick because it didn't go too much into it. But let's look up what the Federal Reserve. Okay, so basically, what the Reserve is and does is it is a central banking system for the United States, which, like I said, it's the federal banking system. And the three kind of main things it focuses on is maximizing employment, stabilizing prices, and moderating long-term interest rates. So they're the ones who do set a lot of that and essentially act as a backup system in times of like financial crises, right? So the creation of it was kind of um like as a result of poor financial decisions from the government, a lot of like financial panic that was going on. Let me see.
They were created in 1913, December 23rd. So it was before the Great Depression. They did not
It
prevent
was
that.
No, they didn't, nor the recession. But I guess the point, and I would have to do more research on it, and I don't know if now is the time to really be looking at that because I don't want to make this too long. Um,
It's fair.
but basically, if the Federal Reserve were to be no more, essentially what that means is there would be no backup system for all that we would have would be privatized banks, right? There would be no federal banking system. There would be no federal so how banks work too, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but basically what a bank is where you go, you put your money in there, right? Banks then use the money that their clients put in to offer loans to other people. And it's kind of this system where the money's never really in there for very long because it's always being used, but they're basically promising you that if you take out this is how much money that you have in the bank and you can essentially withdraw that. Now the problem is a lot of those numbers are kind of not real, right? If every person were to go to the bank right now and want to withdraw the money that they have in the bank, there's not actually that much money in the bank, and that bank would collapse. And essentially, that's kind of what happened during the Great Depression. Is there was a panic. I don't remember why. I think it was like something to do with the stock markets or whatever. There's a big financial panic that I got to get my money out now, and everyone went to try and withdraw their money. And guess what? Isn't actually that much amount of money, real tangibly, in the country. And so then the bank goes bankrupt. Now, what the Federal Reserve does is the Federal Reserve has its own special amount of money that it can use to help bail out banks if they're having a problem. So, what that would mean is that there's no backup plan. There's no, hey, you're having problems here. We'll help you out a little bit and we'll make sure that there's not any kind of financial panic going on. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Mm-hmm.
And they're
But
supposed to try to use the interest rate to try to balance um try and curb the rate of inflation versus unemployment. Um, that type of thing. Like that is their tool, is the rate of inflation. I don't know if that helped at all, but I was just reading while Ryan was talking.
Yeah, sorry, it was hot, so I had to turn on. My fan was not on for some reason, and it's warm in my room. Um,
What were you gonna say, Josh?
I was just gonna say, but you were talking about how this was implemented before the Great Depression, but it didn't help out.
yeah, because the problem was there is that it was like everybody tried to withdraw their money, and like I said, that amount of money doesn't actually exist, right? A lot of what money is, especially nowadays, is numbers on a screen. It's not all real, right? There is not
So then,
amount.
for something like them trying to get rid of that in the new Project 2025 or whatever,
Mhm.
what downside would there be if it was something that didn't really help back then?
They're
Or are we now more
So
prepared
what
now?
it does essentially is if a bank is failing or if a region has a financial crisis, the federal government can step in and help allocate some of their special federal funds to help that not collapse,
yeah, they're
right?
basically there to help bail out the banks and keep the banks afloat. Um,
It
and
won't help either way if there is another nationwide problem because again, that amount of money does not exist. It just isn't. It's mostly just numbers on a screen,
they're trying
which is
to
a problem.
and their main goal is to help us from or to stop us from getting that far in the first place, because like the
Right.
biggest economic crisis is just panic, where everybody's like, everything's failing, I need to get all my money out of wherever it is right now because it's safest under like my mattress. And like Ryan said, like, all the money in the world, it's also tied up in other things. Like your money that you have in the bank right now is not actually there, um, because they take your money and they invest it. That's why you get your tiny bit of interest. Because what they're doing is they're taking like the $1,000 you put in the bank, like 99% of that they are loaning out to somebody else. Somebody else is paying 5% on that loan, and the bank's like, "Well, thanks, Josh. You gave us $1,000. Somebody else is paying 5% on that. We'll give you 0.05% of that because that's what, and you're making like a fraction of what we're making off of that. But since you gave us the money to be able to do that, we'll give you that small small part. That's how banks make their money to operate. And
Hmm.
then that's also, they use the profit that they're going to get to loan out further. And that's how they create this, some of this amount of money that doesn't exist yet to further loan. And then when everybody's like, well, all this money is supposed to exist, I need to take it out because I'm afraid. And then it collapses because it doesn't actually exist.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But so what the Federal Reserve does is, like Ian said, try to stop that from happening by stopping like little crises from happening, so it doesn't evolve into a national crisis. But
And
there
so
isn't
this thing
anything
is
that would
just
prevent that.
gotcha. So they're just trying to get rid of like a safety net, essentially.
Essentially,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm. Um, what they also want to do is adjust tax rates, so that there are only two flat tax rates. The first tax rate is 15% up to about 168,000 annual income. So if your income is under $168,000, you have a flat tax rate on your income of 15%, which is higher than it currently is, I believe, and would be extremely detrimental to those of low and middle income
So if
households because 15% is a lot.
so if you make 0 to 47,000, this is federal by the way, $0 to $47,000 by yourself, you're only paying 10 to 12%.
Mm.
So this would raise it for anybody who makes essentially under 50,000. Now, if you make over that, you're paying 22
So this would
percent,
lower it.
and if you make up to 190, you make 24. So for those people, it would actually be a tax break. But
Mm.
again, we're getting into, the wealthier middle class people that would be getting a tax break, but they probably don't need it as much as those people making under 50K who, are barely making livable wages.
Yeah. And then if you make over that, there's a flat 30%
And that would
tax
only help people who are making 200K or more because they're paying 32 to 37%.
rate. And then they also, I saw something that they want to move from an income tax in general to more consumption tax, which is like a sales tax. I want to put like a national. I don't know if there is a national sales tax. I don't think there is because there's some states that don't have sales tax, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So then they want to institute a national sales tax that I believe would go to the government.
And I believe that would be on top of your statewide sales tax. So
Yes.
that would
Yeah.
that would be like, okay, the government's now going to do, let's say even a 5% federal sales tax, and then California, specifically Los Angeles, because it is also different by county. Um, there's a 10%, I think, about sales
It's like
tax.
nine
So
point
we would
something,
have like
right?
a 15% sales tax. And then
Mm-hmm.
also, I would love it if Harris did this. Can we get sticker prices to show taxes?
Yeah, that'd
So
be good.
that, that would be included. I think I actually went to El Super today, and the price that was on the door for milk was actually the price that I paid, which was nice because I was like, oh man,
Hmm.
it's like 4.49. It's gonna go above $5, right? With
Right.
tax. It was 4.49 when I paid for it, so that was nice.
Nice.
But
Yeah, they have that in a lot of other countries. America does
yeah,
not
so
do that.
maybe because El Super is like a Hispanic run grocery chain, Mexican grocery chain. Maybe they do that, but that was nice. Is that I was like, oh, this milk's already like so much more expensive than Aldi when I go there. So you know,
Yeah.
that would just be a nice thing because I know a lot of foreigners even complain about that when they come here. They're like, how come you see like your game's 19.99 and you're like, oh, mom, give me a 20, and then mom's like, well, that's not gonna be enough, son, because tax, and
Yeah. I mean, that's annoying for us too. Like, I think we all just want, like,
oh,
just
a
get,
hundred
just tell
percent.
me what the price is. What is
Yeah.
the price of the item I want to buy? Because it's kind of like false
Well,
advertising,
yeah,
honestly.
it's deceiving, and I think it's kind of a trick to allow um, you know, corporations to charge more because I think, if I know a game's $60, right? It's basically gonna be 66 or whatever in California, right? But, you know, if they have to put the tax price on the sticker, it's going to say like 66, 67. I might not want to buy it because I know it's going to be that expensive. Maybe they would lower the price of their game to where with tax it's $60. I mean, they might go
Mhm.
the other way and just make it 70 including tax, but which they'll
Yeah.
probably do if that were to happen. But oh,
All right, and then so corporate taxes will change. So currently, the corporate tax income or corporate tax, which is tax on corporations' income, is 21%, and they want to lower it to 18%, and they call that the most damaging tax, which I think is really funny because it's yeah. Um, and it's important to note that Trump, when he was president, already reduced it from 35%. So it'll essentially be half what it was, which means that corporations on what they earn, their taxes, which, companies make a lot of money, think of like Disney or Amazon, stuff like that, went from paying 35% in taxes to the government to 18% if
I'm,
if this goes
I
in.
mean, they say, and who says it's the most damaging? Project 2025.
Yeah, the authors of Project
The
2025.
the only people this damages is the American public, because that's less money for our government, for social services and stuff like that, for the Department of Transportation and Education. It's not damaging to anybody that they're talking about because they probably think, oh, it's damaging to
Which
companies.
is
No, they're gonna
damaging to
get more.
millionaires and billionaires. Like it's damaging to the people at the head of these companies who want to make as much money as they
Well,
possibly can.
cutting it's not damaging to them. That's what they want.
Yeah, no, but having a high
Oh, that's
tax
what
is
they're saying is
damaging to them.
damaging.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
taking it the other way.
the tax is damaging.
I was thinking of it. I'm like, cutting the tax is not damaging, but
Yeah,
okay,
no, no,
gotcha.
no. Also, what they want to do is implement a three-fifths vote threshold will be required to pass legislation that increases individual or corporate income taxes. So basically, if they get in, what they're going to do is say, this is the new tax rate, and if you want to change it, you need three-fifths vote in legislation in order to change it.
I
All right, let's
mean,
rapid fire some of these. Hold on, let's rapid fire some of
no.
these because we
Well,
could go for a long time.
I have a question on that. Can you executive order to change the rules of Congress? Like,
I don't
has that
know.
ever been done before?
I don't think so, but if we have, if we're moving towards an autocratic government,
I mean, I would
uh,
say ideally that's something the Supreme Court could block, right? But the Supreme Court's in his
ideally, but
court,
the
so
Supreme
they
Court's
probably
in
wouldn't
his
block
favor.
it.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's kind of crazy to think is even a possibility. Like, because usually they have to vote on that,
yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, and I even wrote here that they are doing this to create a wall of protection for these reforms, right? To make it much harder for people to
Yeah.
change them, despite a widespread consensus that enforcing legislation that binds a subsequent Congress is unconstitutional, right? So even knowing, because exactly what you're saying, like you're tying the hands of Congress in the future to saying you need these greater requirements in order to change what we want to do is unconstitutional because that's not how it should be, but that's still what they want to do regardless. Okay, now let's rapid fire some of these.
Okay.
Abolish the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which deals with mortgages, loans, credit unions, banks, etc. Abolish the Federal Trade Commission, which deals with antitrust laws and basically regulating companies and trade. Shrink the National Labor Relations Board, which protects employees' abilities to organize and fight unfair labor protections.
Of course.
Basically anti-union and abolishing unions, or at least extremely mitigating unions, which we know they don't like unions. Also, I saw something about like overtime, like limiting overtime pay or how
Oh,
much you can
yeah.
make from overtime, which is wild. We talked about the tariff on most foreign projects, and then a lot of anti-China trade policies as well. So then that's all the economic stuff. Well, all of the economic stuff. That's the main points that I saw that I touched on. And then we're going to go to education next because we've already briefly talked about this. Abolishment of Department of Education because they are concerned with the woke propaganda of schools and seek to take power away from educators and give it to parents. So what they want to do is give parents basically right and say over what is taught in schools, including the power to Um, hire and fire principals and teachers.
How
So
how
that
does
is
that work? Like,
how does
just think of
what
it
work?
logistically, right? You have 30 kids in a classroom. How does every set of parents get to say what their kids are gonna learn?
Mhm.
Like, that's
Mhm.
that's a logistical nightmare. Like, every teacher's gonna quit.
Yeah.
Like, you're
Mhm.
not
And
gonna
then they
have
could put their
teachers.
ministers in there, and there are other people who they know will teach what they want to teach.
Okay, but I mean, those ministers are also not gonna want to put up with the ideas of 30 sets of parents. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
just even talking to any teacher I know, like whether it's mom, auntie, the teachers that I work with, or ex teachers that I work with, like
Yeah.
parents are the worst part of being a teacher, let alone the
Same
problem
with being a
children.
counselor, I'll tell you that.
Sure,
Parents are the worst.
but now you're giving these parents more authority in the classroom,
Yeah.
like to dictate what can and cannot be taught. Like, oh, I don't
Mhm.
want my, like, let's take math for example, just because that's a very religious topic, I guess. Just
Mhm.
like, I don't want my son learning how to divide because I don't want that. Like, what, Johnny has to go sit in a corner while we do division, or like,
Right.
how is that gonna work? Like that. And those are important skills you're gonna need. Like, that's not something that should be debatable or subjective. Like, that's
Right.
it. And that's stupid. And then,
Well, and to be fair, math will probably be the least impacted
well,
subject.
that's also why I'm using it as like the example, and also because I work for a math company, so that's the first thing in my
Yeah.
brain. But also, you're saying parents get to choose to hire and
Parents
fire a
parent
principal.
parents have will be empowered, parents and local school boards, to hire and fire principals and teachers.
So again,
Mhm.
you have 30 parents in a
Mhm.
classroom. We're
Mhm.
talking elementary school at this point.
Right.
How
That's not even the
what if
120,
Yeah,
150 parents that junior high and high school
yeah.
teachers have.
So what if half of them hate the teacher and half of them don't? Like, usually right now, if somebody really doesn't like a teacher, you just move the kid. But now half of them are arguing to fire a teacher and half of them aren't. That's just going to be a nightmare. And then
Yep.
same with the school. You just have hundreds of parents trying to get a principal fired because, maybe they suspended your kid and they don't
Well, and
agree with
here's the
that.
thing,
Like,
right? Like the overarching issue is the people who are educators acquire this position based on schooling and education to get this position. They are education professionals, right? That's not to say that their standards and whatever are ubiquitous. Everyone knows every teacher runs their classroom differently. But that's part of being a teacher is you run your classroom differently, and you're gonna like some teachers, you're gonna not like some teachers, you're gonna like some principals, you're gonna not like some principals. Like the fact
yeah.
that we're allowing, or we will allow, parents to be able to decide, as you said, in a chaotic mess of whatever that realistically looks like. It's not going to be pretty.
W-
To decide that is absurd, and you're also not teaching your students to advocate for themselves and to learn how to manage working with someone that you don't jive well with. Like that's part of a counselor too. It's like, yeah, sometimes you can move a student to a different class. Sometimes you can't. Like at the junior high I was at, they worked on teams there, right? Which means that teachers operated on teams. So a student was placed on a team like we had in junior
Yeah.
high, right? We were on a team. And so the teachers were all on a team. If you don't like your math teacher, you can't we're not going to move you to another team just because you don't like your math teacher. You got to figure out how to make that work. What do you need to do so that you and this math teacher can get through the year and you can be as successful as you can be? We're not teaching kids to advocate for themselves anymore. We're teaching kids that if you have a problem with someone, mommy and daddy will come down and complain enough and get that person removed. And that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't
Well,
help
and
the
like,
kid. That doesn't help the school. That doesn't help anybody. It's
what
just
what
going to be pure chaos.
what new teacher is gonna want to sign up for that? Like, now you're just that would be the
Yeah.
most anxiety ridden job where you have to make sure everybody like
I
likes
don't get
you and everything.
I mean,
Like
and teaching already is like so rough. There are a lot of people who don't want to be teachers. Most of my cohort in my counseling program is with people who thought they wanted to be teachers at one point and were like, "No, I don't want to do this job. I want to do something else in education." right? Because teaching already sucks. Like you have so much responsibility, you have a lot of expectations, you have a lot that you have to do. You don't always get to do it because you have to do 100 other things, right? You're not just a teacher, you're a social worker a lot of times, you're a counselor, you're a psychologist, you're a nurse, you're a mother, you're a father, right? Like you have so many hats to put on because education already is such a poorly funded part of our country as a whole as it is, and teachers are not paid nearly enough and expected to work more hours than they get paid for in the first place. Like it's already a bad job that people don't want to do. And now this is just going to seal the deal that like why would anybody want to be a
When what
teacher?
are we gonna do? Like a vote? Like are you gonna get to vote for your principal? Because I mean the public shouldn't get to decide who gets hired and who gets fired unless there's like a vote, right? Because I mean that would be the most democratic. I mean I
Well,
guess
and
this
again,
isn't a
going back to
democratic like
why are we giving
administration,
people who
but
don't understand anything the right to put people in positions of authority,
I
you know, or
mean
put people in any position?
basically
Like
this is gonna
you're
be the
not
same administration that's elected and has no
right.
knowledge of how to run a government. So
Yep. So there's that fun fact. Also, the authors weigh in on ongoing debates over instruction about race in schools, which conservatives have argued makes white students feel bad. They would not require students or teachers to believe that individuals are guilty or responsible for the actions of other races or ethnicities. So basically, what they want to, and I think that this is a really important part of this whole party and like this whole opinion as a whole. And we're going to talk more about this too. Is this idea that they feel that by teaching things like slavery, for example, that make white people look bad, that they are being blamed for these things that happened in the past and they feel guilty about it. And I think and this is a whole conversation. Like we could have a whole episode just talking about race politics and race views. Um but I think that is a big motivator for a lot of this is we feel bad. And I think part of it probably comes from some of these people are white supremacists and they don't like that they're being called out for it. So they're trying to normalize white supremacy by just completely avoiding
when you're
anything that makes that look bad by avoiding talking about slavery
when you're
and not even
basically
mentioning it.
you're basically lying by omission, right? Because if
Yeah.
people don't learn that this happened, they don't know that these bad things happen and are associated with these types of people.
Yeah. And it's not just slavery, it's, you know, the treatment of the Native Americans and the Trail of Tears and the Manifest Destiny and all that kind of stuff. None of that will be taught because we don't want to make white students feel bad.
Well, okay, let
Uh,
me ask
wh-
you this. As a white
yeah.
student, did you feel bad learning about this stuff?
No, I did not. And I will say I understand where this comes from because I do think that in this diverse society we have going on and in this kind of global conversation about race politics, I do think that there is a part of the left agenda that does attack and blame white people.
Yes.
That's real. And I think that that is detrimental to having and getting to a place of true equity because all you're doing is kind of what is and this is the result of that is making a certain population feel bad and then get defensive and then retaliate back. You know, I don't think that because I think if you're gonna teach, you can teach slavery and say this is what it was and this is not okay, right? You can teach manifest destiny and say this is what it is and this is not okay without blaming, right? Like, because it's not about blaming. It's
I
about
mean,
saying this is what happened. This is the reality of the situation. These are the dynamics of that time. And, you know, we don't condone slavery, but this is what happened. And these are the people who perpetrated it,
yeah, I
right?
mean
That's,
that's how I always felt about it when we learned about it. Like, oh,
yeah,
slavery is a thing that happened. Slavery
yeah,
bad. Like,
yeah,
I don't feel bad that I'm white and let it happen. I wasn't alive during that time. There's nothing I could do
exactly.
about it. I just know that, as a white person, it's my responsibility to not let it happen again.
Right.
And part of my responsibility in doing that is not to vote for Trump. because
Right.
I'm pretty sure if we were to go down that path, we could end up back there.
Right.
And but I don't feel bad being a white person that it did happen, because there's nothing I could do or can do nowadays.
Right.
But it happened. um I don't want to downplay it and be like, oh, it happened, it sucks, move on.
Yeah.
But as an individual, there's just nothing I could do about it. And
Well, and that does tie into, right, the fact that there is a guilt, a white guilt, right, that is in affects, I think, people who, again, I think are white supremacists and don't like that that's being called out as bad, or that they're being kind of revealed and it's being villainized, um, as it should be, right? I think we all kind of agree that white supremacy is not okay here. And then you have the other side where there are people who do attack people who identify as white or who they perceive as white, and do blame them for a lot of this stuff, whether they are like us, who are just individuals who have nothing to do with any of this stuff, but are being blamed for it anyway. And I think that both sides of those, right, kind of both the extremes are what is leading to and kind of fuel each other,
yeah.
and then are leading to this mentality. So I understand where it comes from, but of course I don't agree with it, nor do I resonate with that or identify that way in any way. But that fear and that mentality does dictate a lot of the policies in this project as a whole.
Josh,
And
what do
we're
you
gonna,
think?
yeah.
What do you mean? Like
What do you think about?
teaching schools about the past is just important in general, and having that be removed is not good. That's not how we learn from our mistakes from the past, like you were saying. So
Mhm,
having this just be removed, and yes, there's the whole fear, like, oh, we don't want you to be blamed for the past, and that wasn't part of your history. It's like, no, that's exactly why. It's not
mhm,
like you didn't do that, but you should know why it shouldn't be repeated again, and that's very important. And to just have it removed altogether, that just seems like going in the wrong direction. It's like covering
yeah,
up a mistake that you should learn from, as opposed to just being like, no, it's fine, don't worry about it.
right, right, 100%. Um, yeah, and then so to keep going, the federal government will also no longer investigate schools for signs of desperate impacts of disciplinary measures based on race or ethnicity. Project 2025 explicitly rejects the pursuit of racial parity in school discipline indicators such as detention, suspension, and expulsions over student safety. So essentially, what this means is, currently, if you are in education or know anything about kind of the current state of education or systems as a whole, there is still a lot of racism in the educational system. If you are a black student, you are much more likely to get in trouble than a white student. That is still just the norm
Yeah, I
in
systemic
across the
weight
country.
systemic racism.
No, yes, that is it. Is there is still systemic racism, and that is still a major issue in a lot of schools and school districts. Is there is a disproportionate amount of students of color being disciplined over white students. For it could be for the same thing, it could be for anything, right? It's an issue, and basically what this is saying is, currently, if there is, a trend towards kind of racist disciplinary behaviors at a school or in a district, there will be an investigation about it from the Department of Education to see if this is, inequitable practices in education, right? And then there will be ramifications if it is deemed that there is racist practices in the school or district, right? Anti-racism. However, current with this project, though, there will be no investigations done if there are complaints that a school or a district or whatever um, is acting in a way that seems to be racist or racially motivated. If there are discrepancies with the number of students being penalized and the kind of demographics of that, and that basically what they'll say is, oh, those students were targeted because they are. they are affecting student safety, right? Which is, racist.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's bad if you or anyone you know have students of color, because basically they'll just be more targeted and there's nothing you'll be able to do about it. All right. Also, cut federal funding to any school or program teaching critical race theory or gender ideology. And something that they will also do is that if you are a teacher or an educator or you work at a school and you even acknowledge that there are more than two genders that are not aligned with the biological birth assigned sex of a student, then you will be penalized for it. Because this project and the people who author this project only believe in two genders, male or female, based on your birth
Does it say
biology.
penalized how?
Um, Probably firing, like career penalties, that sort of effect. Possibly jail, I think. Well, when we get to the LGBT section, I think I put a little bit more on that. But yeah, there'll be penalties for that. Because they don't recognize that. And then oh yeah, critical race theory, which is a whole other conversation too. Do you guys know what critical race theory is? Have you
Not
heard
one
that
bit. What
term
is that?
before?
I've heard the term. I still don't 100% understand all it. I think I've Googled it, and it still is just one of those
Mm.
things that I'm like, I don't understand, but basically just understand it as like understanding other races and their coexistence. And
Ah,
it just seems like a made up term to be afraid of.
yeah, so it is a term that is very much demonized, and is used as like the buzzword to galvanize people who again feel like they're being like white people who feel like they're being attacked and that there's too much diversity in the world and blah 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 blah. Blah. Essentially, what critical race theory is it is a theoretical framework that is used to um, essentially analyze the way that laws affect and intersect with race. Okay, so this is a high level, like theoretical framework that is used typically in the legal system to look at, you know, is this law racist or not, essentially, right? That's kind of a very gross simplification of it. But the point is, this is not something that is taught in elementary school. This is not something that is taught in junior high. This is not something that is taught in high school. This is most likely, unless you are a law student or in like, government law or something like that, this is not even something you would learn about in college in your undergrad. This is this is a graduate level thing. And the fact, and again, it is not targeting anybody. It is literally looking at how do the laws and the race and the country intersect and
Systemic
how do those
racism.
influence each other. Exactly. Um,
But we gotta keep
but
it out of those elementary schools because kindergartners can't, you know, they're gonna interpret the Constitution.
right. Well,
So wait,
because
is this
yeah.
basically teaching or getting rid of? What was it again?
So they want any teacher who uses critical race theory will also be penalized. And so here's what that would look like realistically, because this is a term, as I said, that is used to kind of fearmonger among the conservative policy because they don't understand what it is either. But basically, from what I've seen in the past, and like news reports and people who talk about this, is essentially what it means is teaching diversity, right? If you teach diversity, if you read a book that has a brown girl as the main character, that is critical race theory. And you are saying that white people are bad because the main character of this book is brown, right? It's like that kind of level that they are using this term that they don't understand to basically push back against diversity in education.
So we
And so what
cannot
there's
talk about the acolyte because the main character's black girl.
Yeah, pretty much. That's an example of Hollywood and their critical race theory propagating the zeitgeist, and it's bad, and they're bad because
And it's
they're
bad,
anti
and they're bad, and it's all
because
bad.
because it's anti-white, because it's anti-white, as you can see, as you can clearly see. Like, this is the argument, right? Like, I'm not just being sarcastic. Like, this is the argument. That's how they approach it. So basically, what they're saying is, any school that teaches diversity essentially will receive less funding, and teachers can be penalized for it as well, which I assume could be loss of jobs, and any kind of career backlash towards that, because we don't like diversity. They're also going to. Do we have any questions on that? I mean, we could also spend a whole episode talking about that as well. Like that, it's a very uh, deep thing. But again, I think it's important to recognize that one, critical race theory is not an anti-white ideology. It is a theoretical framework, like a legal theoretical framework that is used to examine laws and how they interact with race in this country. That's what it is. It's not a biased political thing. It is as much of a theoretical framework as any other theoretical framework. But do we have any questions on that so far?
Nope.
No.
We good? Okay. Josh, how you feeling right now?
Listen, as like a someone who does nothing, you're giving me a lot of information to try to digest. And like, honestly, I don't know a lot of the things that you had talked about recently. I started taking notes at some point just to keep up with whatever you were talking about. It's a lot of
A lot.
information.
It is a lot of
Do
information.
you do
As a
Do you
you
person
want to
too
take a
who doesn't
break?
have that much information to input, I'm essentially just here learning what you are saying. And I will say part of it kind of gets like fumbled in translation because there's a lot of back and forth going between you guys, and I'm just like, what's going on? I'm losing a point here.
Hmm.
Just started talking about math and education when we're talking about
Yeah.
how that doesn't really get affected, even though it's probably going to be affected by the science because people don't want to talk about religion or something. So
Yeah.
it's a
well
lot of me trying to also translate what you guys are trying to say.
well if you don't understand the point either of us is trying to make, I say ask because I think
Yeah.
that might come across
I
to like
don't have an opportunity to ask because I'm
Just
still
jump
trying to
in. Just talk
understand what
over.
to
either
ask.
jump in, or if you're getting a little confused or not sure what we're saying, like maybe raise your
Raise your
hand
hand.
and
Yeah.
we'll try to clarify even if you don't know what to ask.
Also,
Um
it
just
is a
cuz
lot. And that's the point. That's part of the point, is it's a lot, and it's a lot to digest, and it's going to be a lot for literally anybody. This is a lot, and that's okay. And there, some of these stuff we're talking about, like I'm talking a little bit more about education because that's important for people who are in education to know how this will affect all of these careers going forward, right? That's not necessarily for you. So if some of it goes over your head, that's okay. That's okay too. We're gonna dive into some parts, and if we don't follow along with everything, that's okay. Do your best. Ask questions if you have them. Ask for clarification. That's okay, but it is a lot, and that is the point. Is like, this is freaking a lot. Again, this isn't even everything. Like, we're not even talking about everything. These are just like the highlights or the lowlights, as Ian said.
but I will say if anything confuses you, and I don't want to single you out, but like, both of us have more background information, but if you're not following anything, do ask question just because, maybe somebody who's
I think
listening
part
has
of
the
the
same
issue
question.
for me is that at some point you guys both start talking at the same time, and I cannot comprehend either or.
Okay.
All right. So then, after cutting federal funds to schools that teach critical race theory or gender ideology, they're also going to eliminate Title One funding, for schools with low income students. So currently, if you work at a school, and it is school based, it's not district based. If you work at a school that has, like, I don't know what the rate is exactly, but at least a majority of like low income students, then that school gets additional funding from the federal government. So they get more money,
Is that
which
what
has its
Is
pros.
that Title One?
That's Title One. Yes,
Title
that's what
One just
Title One
means you
means.
have a certain percentage of students that are low income?
Yes, and that you receive additional funding from the federal government for it. So if you hear people talking about schools and say, "Oh, that's a Title One school," it just means it's a low income school that receives additional funding, which has its pros and cons. Because for example, the junior high I did my internship at in school, or in spring, was not a Title One school, which means that the average income of the people who go to that school, the families that are part of that community, are, at least middle class or whatever, right? Are on the higher end, so they don't receive additional funds, which could be rough for that school because that means that they don't have additional money to spend on programs, on like other counselors, for example, or on whatever. So lower income schools do receive additional funds because they need additional funds for additional resources, for additional faculty, for whatever.
And this is part of the
Um,
reason I just want to throw this tidbit in there. This is part of the reason the census is so important, and that they
mhm,
they like encourage people to fill it out accurately and everything. Because like, sure, the government's collecting data on you. A lot of people don't want the government to know stuff about you. It's very important for funding for um, social programs, but things like education and stuff like that. Because if an area is considered wealthier because your income taxes, your property taxes, all that stuff goes to schools and stuff, they're like, oh, the school's probably getting enough from that. We don't need to give them extra money from the federal government. If
mhm,
you report that higher on like the census data, I don't know if they actually use like IRS data or whatever. Um,
I don't know.
but if they calculate that lower, but so yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why the census is so important, not even just for like population statistics and all that stuff. But
Right.
I I
But
could be
so
wrong on
that
that.
essentially that funding though would be cut. Like there would be no more Title One funding, which means schools, in low income areas and with low income communities will receive less funding, less resources, all that kind of stuff. Which is just, obviously bad overall for those students and communities. And then we talked about the vouchers. Basically, parents will get school vouchers to be able to send their students to whatever school they want, whether it's a public school, private school, religious school, whatever. Currently, for those who don't know, students are enrolled based on proximity. So basically, you are just initially enrolled in whichever school you are closest to based on where you live. And there are, basically maps, school maps, kind of like district maps of like if you live within these bounds, you go to this school. If you live within these bounds, you go to this school. If you live in these bounds, so that's how it works currently. And you can have like interdistrict transfer, but we don't need to get into all that because it doesn't matter. But with the vouchers, they can send their students to whatever school. And as Ian said earlier, basically that's taking money from public schools and putting it into private schools, which is unfair for public schools and public school communities. They will also cut the free meal program that is currently in place for all students. For those of you who don't know, all students are currently provided with free meals at school, and there are rules for that and whatever. But basically, if you are a student and you are at school, you get free food at brunch and lunch, and I think most schools have like a breakfast thing too. That like you get there a
That's
little early, you can
nationwide.
get food. I don't know if it's nationwide, but there is a nationwide program for that.
I could have sworn that
Um,
was something that was only used for low income families.
Currently, it is all students
Because I
have.
thought when we
There's a
went to
free.
school, it was only specific students who got it, unless it's
That
been
was the free
expanded.
and reduced lunch
Yeah,
program, and so now there is a free meal program for students,
interesting.
but that would be no more under this.
Because I know like one of the biggest things they talk about when they talk about Walls is that he signed that that thing for like every student to get free food at school.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if it's one of those things where like it's provided by by the federal government, but states and districts and stuff can elect whether they utilize it or not, because that could be the case too, where you just have states or districts that just don't utilize it or don't want it for whatever reason. So I'm not sure exactly all the details of that, but essentially, whatever program that currently exists for free meals for all students would no longer exist.
I still just think it's
Wow.
so crazy that wanting kids to be fed is so controversial.
Isn't that wild? Isn't
Like,
that wild? Because it probably comes down, right, to the whole mentality of like, oh, if you have a kid, you should be able to feed that kid, and that's your responsibility. Why is that the school's responsibility? But it's like, if we have the food to be able to feed people, why shouldn't we feed people? Like,
Yeah,
why?
like if we have the means, why not do it? It's the same with like the housing crisis. It's like we have
Right,
plenty of empty buildings that we could put these people in, but like just
right,
because people think that's wrong, like sure, it sometimes it could feel unfair because like you've worked hard, you can provide for yourself. Some people just like they just need extra help, and I don't
yeah,
get what's so wrong about helping them. Like
right,
our society's stronger when we're all better off,
right.
and I don't see why it's such a big deal, especially because, like, maybe the parents going through a hard time, maybe the parents, let's say a drug addict or something like that. Why are we punishing the children for something
Exactly.
like that? Like, you know, mom and dad, maybe they have 6 kids. They probably shouldn't have had 6 kids because they don't make a lot of money or they don't have a job or whatever, but they do. Like, why should those children be punished and not be able to eat just because mom and dad made poor decisions? Like,
Well,
if
and
we
it
can
might not
provide the
even.
well, no, I know. I'm using an example that's like, probably the type of thing that those people are thinking about is like these people can't provide a means to feed their kid and they're probably terrible people or whatever. But it's like if we have the means to get those kids at least something to make their lives not suck, like why not? Like we're not even talking
Yeah,
about giving the parents welfare and stuff like that. We're just talking about putting food in those kids' stomachs so that they're not starving while they're, going to school and getting an education. Like that should not be controversial.
yeah,
It
I
shouldn't
agree.
be. And also coming from a family that wasn't the most well off to do, even though as a kid I wouldn't know any better. Shout out to mom and dad. But it's one of those things where like sometimes it's just circumstances. It's like coming
Hmm.
from a family of immigrants, like it's not the easiest thing to acquire a job. And in this
Yeah,
day and age too, getting a job is very difficult to begin
yeah,
with.
yeah,
And so to penalize people for not being able to find a job or whatever, it's like it's not in their control sometimes. Like you
yeah,
make sure they can have like a big family, and that's something that they can adjust accordingly to be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't go for that sixth child, maybe stick to four or whatever, or even lower than that. But some things are just out of their hands. Sometimes getting money is just difficult,
yeah.
especially coming from like a family of immigrants. Like that is so hard to do, and now
Hmm.
we're being basically penalized for that, for wanting to have a better life and having these systems that are in play for us to help us out in these rough times being taken away. That's
Hmm.
just so wrong.
Yeah, when it could even be families like of like a single mom who mom works
Mm.
2 jobs and doesn't have time to make breakfast for their kid because they're working, or who, doesn't have time to, pack a lunch for their kid or whatever. Like it could even be stuff like that. Like it might not even be super drastic or whatever. Or even if it's just, like, freaking a typical nuclear family who mom and dad work and, like, the kids go to school. Why can't they also have breakfast? Like, it shouldn't
Yeah,
matter.
especially because they talk about like, oh, it's not fair. Like, sure, if every kid is fed, then the the single mom who can't afford to feed her kids is not paying for food for their kid, but also the family who's well off enough also doesn't have to pay for food for their kids. Everybody's just happier. Every kid
Yeah,
is fed,
yeah.
and society's just better off. Like,
Well, and that's the biggest point that you made, and that, I think, is about this, is why are we penalizing kids? Right? Like the kids are the ones who are affected by this. Why do we want kids to starve? I don't understand that. Like they don't have a say in any of this. They don't have the ability to have a job and make money. Like they don't, and even if they did, why? They're kids. They're kids. Give them freaking food, man. We got the food. Give them the food.
yeah, they're
What's the
not
biggest
supposed
deal
to
about it?
worry about this or have the
And it's
struggles
not like
yet.
they're getting gourmet meals. It's not like they're getting individualized, stone-fired pizza for lunch
They're
every day.
getting
No, it's
cardboard
freaking.
pizza and little frozen chicken nuggets. Like,
Dude, legit though, like at the junior high, they had waffle fries. And I was like,
oh.
yo, you guys got waffle fries? Like, I want some waffle fries.
Our
Where do I
fries
get
were
those?
always like the soggiest
Yeah,
potatoes.
they honestly, some of the food is pretty good. Some of it's not. Some of it's freaking like you get, whatever. And but it's food. It's food, right? And
You
I
know
don't
what I
know. It's
just
just
remembered? I know it's kind of a tangent. You remember those hot dogs in junior high? Like the saran wrap like hot dog
yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Wasn't even that good, but it was so like
No.
I don't know, there's nostalgia with that hot dog.
Sometimes you just gotta eat it, School food.
The junior high
Um,
cafeteria is such a step up from elementary school, but when I actually think about it, the food probably wasn't that much better.
still wasn't that good. It
It
was
was
just
just
better
also
than bad.
like the presentation was just so much better. Like, the burgers came in like foil, like a fast food restaurant or something, instead of
Yeah,
just like slop on a tray. It was funny.
yeah, yeah. All right, they also want to eliminate the Head Start program, which is a program that services low-income families and helps students get to college. They want to create a new way to certify teachers based on their patriotism, giving preferential funding and treatment to states and school districts that abolish teacher tenure for grades K through 12 and adopt merit pay, cutting the number of school administrators, specifically the ones in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and adopting direct election of school principals by parents.
Oh, so they do want an election. That's where they're headed.
Hmm. So does that make sense? Basically, they want to hire and certify teachers based on their patriotism, and give
Why education level, of what they were taught in school and all
right,
that. Why?
Yeah.
right. It's not about quality or about like actual ability to educate. It's about, do you believe in Trumpism? Then you get to go be a
It's
teacher.
not
Have fun.
enough that every student in America salutes the flag every day until
Right.
they're, you know, 18 or so. Like, now all our teachers have to be like America.
Yeah. And also, again, important to note, getting rid of administrators that are pro diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean that's not
DEI, if you've heard that
surprising.
acronym. Yeah. And then there's a quote from one of the authors that said, education is not a public good, it is to be privatized. And that is the mentality
That
upon which they are
that is like
operating.
the opposite of what education should be.
Should be, yeah, but not.
Everybody should have a right to education
Hmm.
and learning like, basic knowledge and skills that are important to life.
Yeah. So that's education. I think now is a good place to stop. We've been going on for a little bit of time. And so we'll do part two next time, and we'll talk about hopefully the rest of it. I think the points will be a little shorter. Um, so yeah, it should be okay. We'll do it. We'll do just a solid part two on the rest of it.
And since we're doing a part two, if anybody has any questions about it or questions for us about our views, like, let us know and we'll have like a little Q&A section at the end if anybody
Yeah.
submits anything.
Hopefully we explain things well. If not, I just with any of this and all of this, I encourage you all to like do your own research, Google it a little bit. Look up stuff again. Wikipedia. I know people crap on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is great. It has links. It has citations to other sources that you can look up where they get the information from. So if you have questions on anything or anything's confusing and you're like, I don't know what this means, I don't know what that means, just do a quick Google search, read some stuff, look some stuff up, and that help if our explanations of things didn't help. We're doing our best here. But this was a dense one. This was a dense episode, and again we didn't touch on everything. Like I did my best to kind of summarize the main points, but I know that I'm sure there's a lot we missed, and I'm sure there's a lot we didn't talk about. And this is a lot. Like it's a lot, and that's the point, right? That's the point. Is like this is a lot, and this is will affect everything,
Everything.
literally everything, even aspects of our society that you may not think of on a daily basis is gonna affect. And it's overwhelming and it's exhausting and it's dense. But that's why we're talking about it, and that's why please do some research of your own and look stuff up for your own. There's a lot of websites out there that break stuff down, that summarize things. Not Wikipedia. For those who don't like Wikipedia, there are plenty. I use several different documents to look up this stuff. Mom was sending me stuff. Auntie was sending me stuff. So there's a lot of sources out there that do a really good job of making all of this digestible. So please do some research, and if it's overwhelming, yeah, it is overwhelming. That's accurate. It's overwhelming for everybody. So don't be too like, "Oh, this is just too much for me." Like it's too much for everyone, and that's why we need to talk about it and why we need to make sure that this hopefully doesn't happen.
Yeah, and remember,
Yep.
following politics isn't easy, but hopefully, in some of our episodes, we can help you guys make it easier. And remember, hope democracy will prevail this year. It
Yeah.
must.
Hope so. Hope so.
Hope so. Yeah, me too.
And we're doing our part. Spread the word. Harris
Spread the
2024.
word. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.